Ladies and gentlemen, what we have today here is an opposition who misconstrues our case, an opposition who misconstrues the context of Singapore today, and an opposition that misconstrues the principles that this nation stands for. Now, they have come up to say that we are sacrificing equity at the altar of growth. No, this is not the stance we are taking. We are not saying that we do not value equity at all. We have already admitted in our first speaker that equity is a problem, that inequality is a problem in society today. But simply, we are saying that when it comes to a decision-making process, when a policy needs to be implemented, we would choose opportunities to improve growth above that of solving equity problems. And that is because we believe this goes with the principles of our nation. At the same time, this would actually solve the problem and reduce the effects of income inequality, which I will explain later in my case. And therefore, their idea of our case is wrong. And therefore, their first speaker has failed to come up with a proper counter to our case because they have simply misconstrued it. No, thank you, sir. Now, they have come up in a POI earlier on to talk about why are we still pursuing unequal growth measures on top of the current growth measures that we already have. Ladies and gentlemen, they don't understand the context of Singapore's economic situation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the real finance minister in the real parliamentary debate mentioned that there are significant opportunities that come and go. It is a cycle. And when these opportunities are past, they can no longer be taken back again. He said that when we lose the opportunity to grow the whole cluster, the critical mass of companies necessary for industries to be Singapore would be lost. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial that Singapore maintains this consistent approach towards growing its economy.
Point of information, sir.
Because we need it to survive in the world today, and because it is principally justified, and because it actually helps the lower income groups, which I'll explain later in my case. But before that, yes, sir.
Sir, we have one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, and we also have one of the highest GDP in the world. Explain, therefore, why we must increase our Gini coefficient then.
Sir, our Gini coefficient might be high, but sir, firstly, it is accompanied with with an extreme amount of economic growth. The poorest in the country are able to feed their children, able to have healthcare, housing. Why? That is because Singapore has always worked towards improving its economy and ensuring that even though the income gap does exist, the people at the lower ranks of the income gap are well-to-do. And therefore, sir, instead of having a country with lots and lots of poor people and lots and lots of rich people, we have countries with a group of people who earn lower incomes, but they can support their family and they have luxurious lives. And they can actually...
Information, sir.
No, thank you, sir. They can actually... They simply do not understand how well-to-do Singapore already is compared to the rest of the world, and therefore that point falls. And now, since I've counted down, I shall move on to my case proper, and I shall talk about how income inequality can be curbed by ensuring economic growth. Now, following the finance minister's point out how the motion is just and essential for Singapore's survival, we believe that making the most of opportunities to grow the economy alleviates the plight of the poor. And alleviates the plight of the poor in a way that is consistent with Singapore's values and is effective. Now, this government believes that the solution to the problems that arise from income inequality does not lie in impoverishing the entire economy. When we deliberately forgo opportunities to grow the economy because of concerns over equity, that is exactly what we are doing. Sacrifice every single member of this community. Well, look at the structure of our state, ladies and gentlemen. We see workfare, not welfare. We witness an emphasis on subsidized retraining and not unemployment handouts. We accept that people are born with different resource endowments, but the equality of opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, is all around us. We believe that individuals must themselves work to improve their lot in life. Hence, any solution to counter income inequality must be consistent with Singaporean values of hard work, meritocracy, and self-reliance. And this is why our solution takes every chance to grow the total size of the economic pie. And this alleviates the problem of inequality by lifting everyone up to a higher income base. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a rising tide lifts all boats. When we grow the economy, the benefits might fall disproportionately across different income groups. However, as long as the total volume of economic activity increases, the effects will percolate throughout the entire economy and overall incomes will increase. For example, from 1990 to 2000, Singapore experienced high economic growth with our GDP per capita rising from 22,000 to 39,000. In the same period, the average household income for the poorest 30% of the country rose by 25%, from $950 to $1,200. This, although less than the 70% increase seen by the richest 30% of households, was significant and improved their standard of living substantially. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these figures are already adjusted for inflation, and therefore their point earlier on about how it's not reflective does not stand. Now, Now we believe that this will continue to happen. This growth, this rise in income will continue to happen with our current push for increased productivity. This is because increasing productivity maximizes our value for our human capital, our only resource. In the process, people from lower income groups are increasingly acquiring more skills. The previously low-paying menial jobs that they have performed are now being replaced with higher skilled and better paying ones. Now that the overall value of labor in the nation has increased, income levels for them, plus the rest of the economy, will increase. The Asian Development Bank study in 2001 has proven that in Singapore, although the Gini coefficient has risen by 0.008 units in 2009, this increase in 1.7% is far less than Indonesia, which has risen by 1.8%. And this is in the context of Singapore growing more than Indonesia. Now, why is this the case, ladies and gentlemen? Because Singapore was able to channel its activities towards skilled labor and creating higher paying jobs for the entire population. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the principle that we are standing here for today, and this disproves the traditional view that they hold about how these are trade-offs. Therefore, we, as side proposition, has proven to you today that our policy is not only principle justified, but practically workable, and is the best solution, the only solution that should be used to tackle the problem here today. Therefore, this motion must stand.
Thank you, Rio.
Now we have a proposition who wants to have their cake and eat it. But the only thing they're going to get, ladies and gentlemen, is cake on their face. I'm going to prove this to you on two main points of contention before I move on to further my team's case. Firstly, on the idea of whether it's really just and necessary, and secondly, on whether economic growth alleviates the plight of the poor as much as that side of the bench would like to have you believe. So firstly, ladies and gentlemen, like my speaker raised in the point of information, our GDP has contracted one of the least in light of the economic crisis, and yet we have one of the highest and largest Gini coefficients in the world. And it troubles me that it doesn't trouble them. No, thank you, sir. That makes no difference. Because like we said, ladies and gentlemen, the onus really lies on the proposition to prove to us why, even in light of strong economic growth that we are already currently posting, there remains such a strong necessity for us to sacrifice the poor, no thank you, madam, and make the Gini coefficient expand and enlarge even larger in this current status quo. And we don't think they have done that at all. No thank you, sir. We tell you that first and foremost, it's not just and it's not in the government's duty or responsibility, contrary to what they would have you believe, to grow the economy at the expense of the poor. Because when the government is elected, it is not just elected to grow the economy, although no doubt, ladies and gentlemen, that is one of its responsibilities. We think the government's duty of care really extends to the people, and perhaps especially so to the poorest and the most vulnerable people in society today. No, thank you, sir. And I'm going to move on to that a bit more in my point of substantive later. And therefore, we tell you that it's not necessary to make the most of opportunities, as the motion reads, to grow the economy, because we don't want to push it all the way to the furthest. Now, if Rio Ho comes out and talks to us about grabbing the opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, before it passes us by, we say perhaps that's all well and good. But if we can get our foot in the door without having to make the most of these opportunities, if we can ensure that we don't twist the knife, no thank you, madam, twist the knife and let the poor writhe in pain, then we think that is good enough, that after if the situation gets better, then we can continue, ladies and gentlemen, at a later period to do so. But we don't have to, in the status quo, grow the economy at the expense of the poor. There is no necessity. Next, ladies and gentlemen, my second point of contention on whether or not it alleviates the plight of the poor. And therefore, I have to point out, ladies and gentlemen, that they have never come back to my first speaker's idea of how real wages decrease for the poor. Because that is important, ladies and gentlemen. They can tell us that the rising tide lifts all the boats. Hold on a moment, sir. But they can never come back to the idea that you can't afford as much as you could in the past, because the rich people who can afford that new bungalow and that new car are driving all the general price level up. Yes, sir.
So we have already proven to you that after adjusting for inflation, the base income of all sectors in society have increased, and therefore our policy actually creates growth among the economy, sir.
Sir, the statistics that you can throw at me, I can throw statistics right back at you. But I tell you the principle of that, the very underlying principle that if the poor gain so much and the rich can only get a little, ladies and gentlemen, there's no way out. No, thank you, sir, of what we on the side of the opposition have been putting forth to you. And therefore, at the end of the day, we don't think we can rely on breakneck economic growth like we have in the past, because you see countries like China, you see countries like India, who traditionally, ladies and gentlemen, have been able to increase GDP by a lot, and therefore they try to bring all sectors of society along with them. But no longer, ladies and gentlemen, has Singapore reached that point. No, thank you, madam. No more can Singapore still afford breakneck economic growth, breakneck GDP increases to do that. We have to take a step back. We have to slow down and look out for the most vulnerable in society in order for us to be truly a successful and truly first world nation. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me move on to my point of substantive for today, on the idea of how increasing the economic growth without looking out for the poor is nothing short of a government dereliction of duty. And that is what we on the side of the opposition stand for, ladies and gentlemen. Because people say a civilized society can be distinguished by the way it treats its most vulnerable of citizens. No doubt the government has a responsibility to grow the economy. No doubt the government has a responsibility to ensure that we post strong and robust figures every year. But similarly, and perhaps even more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we have a greater responsibility to look out for the poor, to look out for the people who cannot help themselves otherwise if they do not have the help of the government. And that is something they have never been able to get their heads around. If we want to call ourselves a first world nation, it's not good enough, ladies and gentlemen, to post first world GDP growth statistics and yet not have and have a portion of society not be able to keep up. We say that a widening income inequality also leads to things like resentment. It leads to discontent amongst the populace. And whether or not it boils over to something else is not quite the point, because what we need is a government who is accountable and responsible to all of us. And that's what we elected them in for. Like we have said a lot of times, this is the Singapore way, ladies and gentlemen. Using and utilizing the collective efforts of our people to overcome any crisis. That is what we need. And that is not what we are able to achieve if we do not take the poor along with us in our stride. If they want to talk to us about what the real finance minister said, ladies and gentlemen, the real finance minister in this budget also talked to us about how prospects for 2010 are good, although we have to be watchful for risk. And we say that this is one risk that they didn't watch out for. Therefore, the poor are very proud to oppose.
Thank you, Max.